Honestly, this is my favorite part of the program because this actually is not so much us talking about the issues and discussing the challenges, but this is very much a time to pay homage, pay gratitude, and to thank individuals that, not just me, but many people in this room, I think even in ways that we don't even know, have benefited from over the course of time. You know, the video shows a little bit about the SFS, the concept. Alex is the founder of how we visioned to create a network that stands for freedom, that stands for the principles of a free society, but also works within the realm of national security. But in reality, when I first really understood what it is we're trying to achieve, it was in 2008 when I was working at the Atlas Network. And when I met, I met his son first, Alan Manwaring, who came to our offices and said, I have an idea. I have, an interesting concept. I don't know who my father is. My father has been working for several decades on understanding insurgencies all throughout the world, but particularly in Latin America, because he started his, I don't say started his career, but he definitely focused a lot of his career in the 1980s looking at the conflicts in Salvador, and had created a paradigm, a model for looking at insurgencies. So anyone that's done work in counterinsurgency, or even I brought in that, worked at revolutions, looking at revolutions around the world, you probably heard the term asymmetric warfare, right? I'm sure many of you probably even use that term in your speeches, in your works, and it's funny, in Washington you hear it all the time. You hear it on testimonies, you hear it on TV, but it's ironic, you find very few people actually understand what that term means. You find a lot of people that use it, but nobody can define it. And Max was one of those folks that first told me, he said, well, listen, Joseph, he said, war is very simple. Warfare isn't bombs and bullets and bunkers. If you study the history of war since the Peace of Westphalia, 1648, the birth of the sovereign state, warfare is nothing more or nothing less than compulsion. The ability to compel your adversary to bend to your political will. And if you could do that without firing a shot, well, more power to you. So asymmetric, I think we all know what asymmetric means. It's just difference of capabilities. In the case of warfare, military capabilities. When you are inherently a weaker military, you have to be creative. You have to use other tools, other things at your disposal to be able to compel your adversaries to bend to your will. And so that includes things like public opinion, political legitimacy, and a range of other factors. And what Max had done through his work, and actually I think JD mentioned this university, Francisco Marroquin. This is a picture from 2012, but actually we started, I think, in 2008, 2009, holding workshops in Latin America where we took Max's work, Dr. Manwaring's work for over 2 decades, at looking at asymmetric war, looking at insurgencies, looking at revolutions, and broke it down. And so it's technically a mathematical model. It's a regression that looks at various variables that are consistent in different kinds of unconventional conflicts. His book, matter of fact, that I recommend, one of his books that I recommend everybody go out and purchase a copy, is called not Unconventional Wars, but Uncomfortable Wars. Because when the time was published, it was the vision of what we're going to look at in the future, essentially saying that the future of warfare is going to look less like some of the things we see in Hollywood, with robots and drones and Terminator Salvation and that scenario, and it's going to look more like what we see in Syria, what we're seeing in Venezuela, what we're seeing in different parts of the world. And fundamentally, this is Alan's idea, this is really Alan's work, was to take those concepts and teach them to another generation. Now, you've heard this in the morning panel, you've heard this in the afternoon, the second panel. I think we're probably going to hear it throughout the day, is we need to develop another generation of leaders, another generation of folks that understand war, understand warfare, but not just in uniform, not just folks that are mandated to understand it, but individuals in the press, individuals in the public, individuals in Congress, in parliaments, folks, because fundamentally wars become a societal challenge, and wars are fought in many ways. So Max has been very instrumental to the work I've done. Later throughout the day, we're going to talk about Venezuela. I believe it was a 2005 publication by Dr. Manwaring, might have been earlier even, when he wrote about Chavez's Bolivarian Revolution. He was a scholar at the U.S. Army War College, and he published a monograph describing the Bolivarian Revolution, not as, at the time, remember this is 2005, we're knee-deep in Iraq. Middle East is very, very much a priority for U.S. policy. But is to look at the Bolivarian Revolution and to say, this is a serious problem. This is not a clown, like some people had called him at a certain point. This is not a pet project of a rogue of bad actors in Latin America that if we just wait, they're going to go away. This is a systematic, orchestrated, planned revolutionary project that's tied to revolutionary struggles worldwide. It's another chapter of things we've seen in other parts of the world, but this time with a gentleman that really understood asymmetric war too, which is, unfortunately, Lieutenant Colonel Hugo Chavez. And that, I think, was at the time ignored, actually, to be honest with you, throughout most of the policy community. I think, we looked at it, we said, okay, it's interesting, but through the test of time, and now we're in 2017, so we're more than a decade later, and I think, Dr. Manwaring, your words have proven to be prophetic. The challenges we're seeing in Venezuela, what we're going to talk about later today, it's much more serious than simply bad policy. It's much more serious than simply drug trafficking or a criminal state or narco state. This is very much resembles insurgencies and revolutions we've seen around the world. With that, I would like to first give my gratitude to Dr. Manwaring for all the lessons that you taught me over the years, for inspiring me to do the work that we do and doing all the work that we've done through the center, through the workshops in Guatemala and Chile, Colombia, and other places. But I know that I'm not the only one that you've inspired through your work. I'd like to invite somebody else on the stage who is another individual I've learned a lot from, and we're going to meet him and we're going to hear much more about him. He's on the third panel. But I know that our encounter when I met Doug Farah was very much through because we saw the world kind of through a similar lens, a lens that had been shaped, glasses that had been provided, and a prescription that had been given by Dr. Manwaring. So I'd like to invite Doug Farah to say a few words, to also to acknowledge Dr. Max Manwaring.
Well, thank you, Joseph. And I'm a little older than Joseph, if you hadn't noticed. And I started dealing with Max back in the 1980s in the wars in El Salvador, is where we first started reading and talking about what insurgencies were, how one would look at them, how one could analyze them. And it was fascinating, but it was not something I paid a great deal of attention to because I was out covering the wars on a sort of day-to-day basis. And after the wars, when we began looking at what was coming next, is when I really became acquainted with Dr. Manwaring's work. I began to study it. And further down the road is I'd been looking at states, and we had developed, based on what Max had written and what I'd been seeing elsewhere, the idea is something had fundamentally changed in Latin America and the rest of the region, and that was that we were seeing states directly reaching out to transnational organized crime as a matter of policy and using them. So I sat around and thought about this for a while, and I thought, okay, I'm going to write something, I'm going to call them criminalized states, and I'm going to try to map out conceptually what this means. So I did, and I sent it to people, and they said, like, oh, we can't write that. That's like way over the top. So somebody said, did you send it to Max? He's at the Army War College. And I said, no, I hadn't sent it there. So about 2 minutes later, he said, I would love to publish this. Give it to us, and we'll push it through. And there's a little resistance internally up there, and Max pushed it through. And it became perhaps what I think is my most original contribution in analyzing the hemisphere, but it comes a great deal from Max and his willingness to provide a framework, and then to ensure that that framework was able to be applied and pushed forward. So, and then the next phase of what I was doing was looking at, I was spending a lot of time with the gangs in Central America, the MS-13, and who had written about third-generation gangs but Max. So we had the idea of, he had formed the idea, which I honestly did not agree with in the beginning. I thought it was too much. I thought it was taking things further than the gangs could go when he was talking about third-generation gangs and fourth-generation gangs. And I was like, I'm with them on the ground. I see them sort of at the second stage. I don't see them ever taking the leap to the next step, the next stages. And son of a gun, a few years later, there was the third generation gangs playing out, very much the way Max had described them, and the potential that he was seeing before I was able to catch up with his ability to conceptualize them. So I think we do owe great debt to Max and his groundbreaking work. And I think, as Joseph said, it's provided an enduring framework it hasn't gone out of style, it hasn't gone out of date, and it's been incredibly useful for understanding the Bolivarians. I think I gained a lot of my understanding through that as well. I was looking at how things were going, and I couldn't quite figure out until we came up with the idea of criminalized states now what was really going on there, because it clearly was not what conventional wisdom was saying, but I couldn't quite figure it out. So anyway, thank you, Max, for your many years. I had the pleasure of working with Max in a conference, I don't know if you recall, on when we brought in a bunch of disarmed guerrilla movements to talk about how insurgencies did intelligence. And I don't know if you remember that when we did that in Washington about 2005, 2006. And that was great. We had the FMLN, we had some Sandinistas, we had the M19. I don't remember who else we had there to talk about this. And you could see that what Max was seeing from one side of the mirror was playing out on the other side of the mirror very accurately the way he had looked at it. So thank you for your many contributions, and it's been a privilege to be your friend and a colleague through these many years.
And with that, I'd like to welcome, and please do join me in honoring and thanking Dr. Max Manwaring for his lifetime of work, his achievements, and Max, just from me to you, mission accomplished. You've inspired a whole new generation of folks that are going to take your work and continue to apply it throughout the challenges worldwide. So please allow me to give the Lifetime Achievement Award for contributions to the realm of national security in the Western Hemisphere to Dr. Max Manwaring.
If you don't mind. If I can get this. Okay, I think I may make it now. Well, thank you, and thank you. De todo mi corazón. Anyway. I've got a lot of people to thank. And my son, who takes care of everything for me, like a British officer's Batman. I have my son Alan take care of things for me, and he's provided me a list of people I need to thank. And I guess I'll do that first, and before I do what I was planning on doing anyway. But I'm supposed to remember not only Joseph, but also Alex. Alex around here somewhere? Yeah, oh, there he is. Too close. Too close. And Jamie Gordon is there, yeah. Roger, is he, Roger Palomar, is he here today? He was. I love his sense of humor. And other people, Ambassador Ed Core, he was the U.S. ambassador to El Salvador when I first met him, and he and General Galvin got together and decided I should write a book about the war in El Salvador, which I did with Ed Core beating me about the head and shoulders and all, and making sure that I got to meet all the right people and to interview all the right people. And the result of that was a book, an oral history of the war in El Salvador, which almost didn't get published because I had said that we had, this was 1986, I had said that that we were in a stalemate in Salvador, and somebody in Pentagon objected to that term, and General Galvin, General Galvin literally intervened in my behalf to make sure that that book was published. And when it was published, it was designated as one of the, not 10, but one of the 20 most important works published in 1986. And that was by the American Library Association. So Ed Core, who isn't here, Norm Bailey, who isn't here, Brian Fonseca, are you here? No. John Perdue. Boy, we got a lot of absenteeism. Julio Sereno, Argentine. You need to get in touch with, when you're working with Argentina, you need to get in touch with Julio. Arturo Contreras, Chile. John Griffith, Chile. Is that it? Mark Walker. Yeah, I got a whole bunch anyway. I think we've got most everybody. Thank you to all for you to also recognize the Congresswoman from Florida who was here earlier, received another award. So I thank you for all you've done here. Let me just give you a bit of, how much time do I have? 5 minutes. Let me give you a quick rundown about the so-called Manwaring Paradigm. Somebody mentioned that Michael Halloran in the New York Times coined the phrase max factors, and we have the Manwaring Paradigm. We also have a sword model. They're synonymous. And the reason I want to bring this up is that I didn't do this by myself. I had a lot of good help. And I thank them in absentia as well. So with that, let me just take you, this book not only, or not this book, the paradigm not only involved a bunch of people besides myself, but some very talented individuals, and some of whom aren't even with us anymore. But the idea of the book, or the paradigm, was first generated by General Maxwell Thurman, who at the time was the Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army. And I was at the War College and on faculty at that point. And he asked us to look into the recent wars we've been engaged in. This was just after the Vietnam War, remember. We were all trying to figure out why we had won the battle but not the victory. And so he would like to know what's new in here. What did we not understand? What did we not know when we were in Vietnam and we'd lost so many casualties and created so many other casualties on the other side? What's new? What was different? The basic answer to that question, we were fighting in a war of attrition, traditional war of attrition. They were fighting an asymmetric war, just like Joseph was saying. If you haven't got the same amount of guns and other kinds of weapons, fall back to asymmetric war. Fall back to something that the enemy doesn't understand. And you can beat him that way, which I think was what really happened. We won all the battles, but we lost the war. And nobody's been able to understand that even to today. It's hard for people to understand that. And so what the paradigm does, I think, most importantly, I mean, it's something you can actually use. You can actually measure things. You can actually run them through the pretty sophisticated computers like they have at the University of Michigan and come up with a situation where you have only one chance out of 1,000 that you're wrong. So anyway, the thing about, as far as I'm concerned anyway, is that the paradigm talks about stuff a lot of people don't understand, don't want to understand, because it's different and it's hard to change. But the fact of the matter is that this is the war of the future, and we've got to learn to understand it. If we don't, we're going to lose every time, and we will not make America great again. The most important thing I think out of this is that we have a means of looking at things nowadays. When we were testing this stuff out, and this took a period of about 12, 13 years. This wasn't done overnight. The central strategic problem in modern asymmetric war is a matter of legitimacy of government, or the malgovernance, is what some other people talk about, malgovernance, lack of legitimacy. Whatever you call it, the fact remains that at the base of all of this, the central strategic problem is that of legitimate governance. You can go back to that every time, and you'll find that if you don't take those issues into consideration, that you're going to lose every time. A clever way of telling me I only have a minute left. But anyway, the idea is you look at this and you look at it carefully. It's a matter, again, of thinking. Joseph mentioned the idea of thinking earlier. If you don't think about these things, if you just go on charging down the corridor, whatever you want to call it, high diddle diddle, down the middle, clean socks and hot soup when you get there, this sort of thing. If you're thinking in these terms, you're thinking in traditional warfare terms, again, you're going to lose. So it's important that we learn to think, and I think that that's the best thing that the paradigm does for you. First reading, you may not understand it, but second reading, third reading, you start to understand, and all of a sudden the light flashes on. And why haven't we done this before? Why haven't we learned this before? So it's a matter of thinking. Somebody's mentioned, I think maybe Doug mentioned it, that's the idea of people. Well, let's just leave the time's going on. I won't take that, but it's a matter of learning to think, and it's easy when you start reading this sort of thing, trying to figure out what's been going on, and you apply it to various cases you know in the past. And the last thing I'll say about the paradigm is that we compared this against 4 or 5 other paradigms. General Sir Robert, what was his name, in Malaya. The British general wrote very carefully what his paradigm was for winning in Malaya. CIA had a paradigm. General Gorman had a paradigm at Southcom. A couple of others. We tested those against each other, and the Manwaring paradigm, I think Max Factor's sword came out predicting 89.9% of the cases correctly, which is unheard of. The British general, his was the next, clear down the list, 70s, 78% he predicted correctly. CIA model predicted at 48%. This sort of thing, but again, the point is that it works, but you got to think about it, and that's the whole idea. And I'm going to end it with what I think is a joke. You've all heard of a Frenchman, philosopher by the name of Descartes. He was at a bar one day. He had a couple of drinks, and after he'd finished the second drink, the bartender came up, "Would you like another, sir?" And he said, "I think not." And he disappeared.
We have to say just one thing to these guys.
What do we have to say?
I have my first memories from when I was like about Will's age, so that's why I wanted to bring him here today. Anyway, they've asked me to say something really quickly. I have sat through many dinners, conferences. Well, first of all, I've had the honor for the last 15 years of my last 15 years to really sort of help my father do a lot of things and travel with him and go through the world with him on a lot of things. And there's two things that really come to my mind. First is, in one of the settings, he was being asked at the end of his thing, what is the most important thing to remember? He was asked this question by probably an Army major, colonel. Hey, Will, don't worry, I'll talk to these guys for a second, okay? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sarah, can you come take him for a second? Okay. Here, Joseph. Okay. All right. Okay, we'll make this quick. We'll make it quick anyway. He was asked this question once, and I can't remember what it was, in one setting. He gave a lecture, and they were asking questions at the end. And somebody asked him, what is the most important thing for us to know as we prepare for the next generation of what we're going to be doing? And he said, learn history. Learn history. Learn history. And he said it just like that. Those three: learn history, learn history, learn history. The other thing I'll say is that my growing up in the environment that I grew up with him and my mom, people will always ask me, what does your dad do? And I would say, for some reason they make a big deal about him because he tells people common sense. Which is, if you want to understand how to deal with asymmetric warfare, then you simply need to understand and understand the root causes. Hey, Will, we got to tell him one more last thing.
What do you need to tell
I got to tell him that the most important thing for your generation to understand, to deal with what they got to deal with, is to understand the root causes of what's going on in the world, which are economic and social issues. You have to understand the root causes of what causes all the problems. And if they understand that, then your generation will be in good shape. That's what I tell people that my dad is, and I said, I don't know why that's such a big deal. That's common sense. Anyway, so thank you so much. Our family is so honored. And everyone in this room, we could thank everyone in this room. I mean, these are all of our friends. And so thank you. I mean, just thank you. We're honored. Joseph, JD, where's Joseph? Joseph, thank you so much. JD and Alex, I mean, just everybody. I could go on and on. But thank you very much. So, thanks.